Maxwell was among Epstein's closest associates and helped him exploit girls who were as young as 14 years old.
The government recommends quite a prison sentence for British socialite turned convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. Law&Crime managing editor Adam Klasfeld lays it all out. Plus, Jussie Smollett is speaking out again, but could he get himself into more trouble? Legal analyst Dr. Tracy Pearson explains. And the horrifying hazing incident that left a freshman disabled and fraternity brothers charged. Criminal defense attorney Neil Rockind gets into the case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So Ghislaine Maxwell is currently awaiting sentencing after a jury convicted her of sex trafficking and conspiracy for her role in the grooming and enticement of minors to be abused by the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. Now, in a prior episode, we reported how Maxwell claims that she should receive a lenient sentence because she alleges that she was severely mistreated at the Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center. She also highlighted charitable work that she's done and so forth and so forth. Well, the government has come back with its response and its recommendation for her sentence. And what a recommendation it is. Joining me now is Law&Crime managing editor Adam Klasfeld. Adam, great to see you again.
Great to see you too. And what a recommendation it is indeed. It's the highest they could have gone under the maximum sentence. The maximum sentence is 55 years. And prosecutors calculated the sentencing guidelines between 30 years and 55 years and said that she should get a guideline sentence. So what does this mean? Ghislaine Maxwell turned 60 years old at Christmas. If the prosecution gets its request and it's somewhere within the sentencing guidelines, she is receiving what is effectively a life sentence. And what they wrote to support the request was scathing and really quite something. You mentioned earlier that Ghislaine Maxwell claimed to have been mistreated behind bars, and kind of central to that claim was the supposed credible death threat that she received. And I always tell people, Jesse, always read the footnotes. If you look at court documents, there are all these nuggets revealed within the footnotes. And the footnote on that claim is a doozy. They said they looked into what this credible death threat was, and that essentially this was an inmate who said, if someone gave me millions of dollars, I would kill Maxwell. And someone overheard it. The person was transferred. There was no offer of money. And it came out being essentially a lot less than what prosecutors called the sensational claim that Maxwell's defense attorneys advertised. This was a passing remark from an inmate who was moved, and essentially the prison had investigated it, revealed that the inmate had not actually been paid to kill the defendant and had not actually threatened her. It was a passing comment. The inmate was moved. So, like I always tell people, always read the footnotes.
But they used that against her, right? In the sense that they looked into these claims, like you said, the assassination plot, her claims of mistreatment. They didn't find that. Am I right? And they're now using it against her in the sentencing?
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. Now, as I mentioned the last time we were talking, Maxwell placed quite a bet on that she made the claims of mistreatment a pretty central feature. And I said back then that was a very risky move for her. The reason I said that was risky is, one, it would be investigated. Now it's before the judge. That an investigation turned up much less. It was that they say, according to prosecutors, that Maxwell's defense team really overstated it. But what's more is it empowered this argument from the government, basically saying that Maxwell is trying to blame everyone else. She's trying to blame the media. She's trying to blame the Bureau of Prisons. She's trying to blame the Department of Defense. And they say that she is not showing any remorse. And indeed, her sentencing briefing, the defense attorneys were basically saying that we're not going to argue anything about her relationship to Epstein because we're appealing. So all of the focus, essentially, of the defense sentencing memo was on her supposed mistreatment behind bars. Now, if the judge doesn't believe it, and she didn't believe it with the bail memos that were the bail motions that were rejected time and again before trial, this bet could very easily blow up in her face, because she is not saying that she is expressing any guilt or remorse over the conduct that the jury found, this horrific sex trafficking crime. That she is, according to prosecutors, painting herself as the victim. And that could really blow back against her when she is sentenced on Tuesday.
All right, we're going to watch and see what happens with her, and see if the judge will ultimately side more towards the prosecution, more towards the defense, or maybe down the middle. Law&Crime's managing editor, Adam Klasfeld, thank you so much for the great reporting as always.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's talk about Jussie Smollett. So as you might recall, the former Empire star was convicted of 5 counts of disorderly conduct for lying to police about being the victim of a hate crime attack, when in reality, he had staged the whole thing. And he was sentenced to 150 days behind bars, but was only locked up for 6 days before being released pending his appeal. But now Smollett decided to sit down for an interview on SiriusXM's Sway in the Morning.
If I had done this, I'd be a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is that's not really questionable.
And he goes on to say, quote, "If I had done something like this, it would mean that I stuck my fist in the pain of Black Americans in this country for over 400 years. It would mean that I stuck my fist in the fears of the LGBTQ community all over the world. I'm not that mother effer, never have been, don't need to be." I'm joined now by legal analyst Dr. Tracy Pearson, who could hopefully make some sense of this for me. Dr. Pearson, great to see you. Great to have you on here.
It is great to be here, Jesse. Thank you for having me.
I can't say I'm surprised he's doing an interview, but he has. Do you think that this puts him, and we'll get into some of his statements, do you think this puts him in any kind of legal jeopardy, considering the fact that his appeal is still pending?
Absolutely. I mean, my first rule of thumb for clients is shut your mouth. So I don't know why he's out there running around when his case isn't final.
Well, what do you think it is? What is he trying to rehabilitate his career, his reputation?
Absolutely. I mean, he has made statements that he's not going to let this get in the way of him returning to being on screen. And so I think that's what he's attempting to do. But if that's what he's attempting to do, he really needs to slow his roll, and he needs to wait until his case is resolved before he starts trying to do that, because who knows what's going to happen.
Some of the things that he said in this interview were trying to clarify prior statements. You recall that he did that interview with Robin Roberts. And he says, look, I didn't want to do an interview. I love and respect Robin Roberts. I did not want to do that interview. That interview wasn't for me. That was for my character. And he talked about it kind of being performative, which I thought was interesting because, again, that's when he kind of recounted for the whole world how he was the victim of this attack. And now he's trying to explain why he said the things that he had to say.
Yeah, I have seen over time a shift from people making statements and us judging them on prior inconsistent statements in various media to, for example, the Redlick case recently, where multiple statements were made and they were differing views, and yet she was acquitted. So I think there's a real problem with the way that folks are using the media. We need to be able to rely on what people are saying, and in order to judge their character, in order to know facts. And the idea that this was performative or that was for his character, it just doesn't square with me.
He goes on to say, I'm genuinely sorry to say this. I felt like I just became, and he uses a discriminatory term to refer to a gay man that got his ass beat, or at least I felt that's what people saw me as. And so I was trying so hard to like the posturing of he hit me and then I hit him back. And I was just like, oh my goodness, you look ridiculous. Again, trying to explain away, parts of his story for people who maybe, because those were things I think during the course of the trial that didn't quite add up, and he's trying to explain it. I mean, that's what it seems like a little bit, right? That there were the things that really hurt him in his trial, he's now getting a chance to explain away.
And yes, I understand that. But, again, as with Johnny Depp, what happened? He waited until he had that opportunity. I think when you try your case in the press, or when you go to the press and try to shift opinion, it is dangerous for you, because it creates these prior statements that can be used against you at a later date. It makes you look like you don't know what you're talking about. It makes you look like you're flailing. And that's what he seems like. It's just that this is really, frankly, for a therapy session and not for talking to the media.
He is so adamant that he had no reason to do this. He says all these things that I was creating, there'd be no reason for me to do something like this. And, you think about that, it seems almost hard to believe that he did it, even though he was convicted of this. His case is going to appeal. I know there's this other issue of double jeopardy as well. When you look at his case overall, and again, it just seems so unbelievable what he did. Does he have a chance to get a successful appeal, have this thrown out, and show the world that he was telling the truth?
When you look at the law just strictly on its face, they use a Blockberger test, which comes out of the Supreme Court, which is based off of an idea that you can only be charged for two crimes that use proof of facts that are needed for both. So if proof of facts are needed for both, then that would be double jeopardy. Generally, there's also sort of a transaction test that some states use. I don't know if Illinois uses it, but what I'm thinking of when I think about this is I think about the Bill Cosby case out of Pennsylvania. And there the court said, look, he came to an agreement and he had a right to rely on the prosecutor's word. And so he believed that he wasn't going to be prosecuted. And as a result, then he did this civil deposition. Here, Jussie Smollett came to an agreement with the prosecution. And when you do that, you come to a global resolution. You're resolving all of the things that could possibly, have occurred during that transaction. And so he relied on that, pled to that, and then they went and, put in place a special prosecutor to go and charge him after there was public pressure. And so in my mind, that is the same issue where there was a reason to rely on the prosecutor's word that this was done. And I think that he has an argument to make there if the court buys it, if they see it the same way, which is that if you're not able to rely on the prosecutor's word when you come to an agreement, then the entire system will come to a screeching halt, because no defendant would come to an agreement and there would be no global resolutions or pleas.
All right. Well, we'll see which way his case shakes up and whether or not this is the first of many interviews that he will do during the pendency of his appeal. Legal analyst Dr. Tracy Pearson, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Over now to an incredibly sad story. Two men, Ryan Delante and Thomas Schultz, were indicted on criminal charges with respect to a horrifying fraternity hazing incident at the University of Missouri, Columbia that left a freshman disabled. I'm talking about 19-year-old Daniel Santulli, who during an event at Phi Gamma Delta was forced to drink a liter of Tito's vodka and had beer funneled into his mouth, leaving him with a blood alcohol level of 0.468. After he fell on the floor, members drove him to the hospital. He was placed on a ventilator, and now he has what seems to be irreversible brain damage. He is blind, he cannot speak, and he cannot walk. Schultz, the fraternity president, and Delante are facing charges of felony hazing, misdemeanors of supplying liquor to a minor or intoxicated person, and Schultz also faces a tampering with evidence charge. Another fraternity member, Alec Wetzler, who actually poured the alcohol into Santulli's mouth, was charged with supplying alcohol to a minor and possession of alcohol by a minor. I want to bring in criminal defense attorney Neil Rockind to talk about this. Hey, Neil.
Hi, how are you? My heart goes out to that family.
It is a nightmare. It's one of the worst stories I've ever read. It's funny you should say that. Not funny, but it's interesting you should say that, because David Bianchi, who is the Santulli's family attorney, he said this is the worst fraternity hazing injury ever in the United States. And I'm of a position, I think he might be right. These are incredibly serious charges. these guys are facing. I can't imagine a defense. How do you think that this is going to play out?
Not well. It is, and David Bianchi was right. He described it as the worst non-fatal hazing injury that he's seen, because obviously the loss of life in a case is awful. But this young man, I mean, you look at the pictures of him, Jussie, and the pictures of him before this incident and then after. I mean, you talk about essentially a life loss. It's you send your kid to college, and we keep hearing stories about this. It seems like you send your kid to school, to a public school, to a elementary, to a high school. You send your kid to college, and it just seems like that. I mean, I guess I'll say it this way. This seems like friendly fire, right? I mean, these are people who are supposed to be your brothers. You join a fraternity not just for partying, but you join it because you're looking to take a large campus and make it smaller. And the idea that there's this gauntlet that this young man had to attempt to make it through and didn't, and resulted now in can't walk. I think he can't speak. He's blind. I mean, it's tragic.
And he had been crying to his family before this event about the pledging process. They told him to get out of it. Apparently, he said he wasn't a quitter. Again, going back to these charges that these guys are facing, is this prison time? And what do you imagine a defense could be?
So I've looked at the statute, and hazing and consent is not a defense, for example, in the Missouri felony hazing statute. And it's so I do think prison time is on the table. I think that the news and the media, when a case like this, which is a symbol, which is sort of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, there's so many more of these hazing cases out there. And it's very hard to rally around the fraternity and the fraternity brothers. Jussie, the image of fraternity members in their, I don't want to stereotype, but in the polos and the bongs and the beer bong and the big brother reveal. In the meantime, those are not positive images with members of the public. Very few people have very positive images of fraternities. This statute very broadly defines hazing. A person commits the offense of hazing if he or she knowingly participates in or causes a willful act occurring on or off the campus directed against a student or prospective member that recklessly endangers the mental or physical health or safety of another member for purpose of initiation or admission into or continued membership in any such organization to the extent that such person is knowingly placed at probable risk of loss. The statute is written so that there are multiple ways that someone who didn't know what was going on or didn't actively participate could argue a defense. That's not the case, as I understand it, for the accused in this case.
Well, I was going to ask you if we could see more indictments against other members of the fraternity who saw him passed out. Maybe, I think he was white in the face, blue lips, and didn't do anything. Could they face criminal charges as well? Could we see more indictments?
Yes. It would not surprise me to see more indictments. I don't think it would surprise you. I think it's a very good question. I think what likely happens is there are going to be two individuals that are currently charged because they're currently right in the bullseye in the sights of the prosecution. And then clearly, as the case develops, they could offer more information about others. Look, there's no doubt that the two kids who were involved, based upon what we know so far, there's videos, there are photographs, there are admissions. It's hard to quarrel with your own words, where these kids went back. One saw him, they forced the alcohol down his throat in a bong. Second, he fell back, injuring, then fell back intoxicated. Then they attempted to force it, I believe, more alcohol down his throat to finish this bottle. Then they try to carry him to a room. They drop him. I mean, if you drop a potato or a banana, it's going to bruise. If you drop an egg, it breaks. if you drop a person who can't defend themselves because they're intoxicated and their blood is so thin because it now has a bunch of alcohol in it, you can just imagine what's going to happen to him. And it did. It's very foreseeable.
I just hope that this is one of those cases where it will lead to really an end in this. You know, it's a situation where this was a fraternity that said we have a no alcohol policy, quote unquote, but obviously they were breaking the rules there. And Santuli's family had filed lawsuits against 23 members of the fraternity. All but 2 have actually settled. They filed lawsuits against the fraternity and the owner of the house as well. So obviously, while those cases will not make the family, it will not repair what happened, not make them whole, it is maybe holding someone accountable for what ultimately happened. You know, and Jussie, Neil, I'll give you some final thoughts. We have about 20 seconds or so.
We just keep seeing history repeat itself. And we hope that at some point, one of these cases that we can stop the history and the repetition before there's more grave and serious injury. I appreciate the chance to talk about this subject, and hopefully some young people out there learn a very painful lesson by just watching what happened to this Missouri fraternity member.
I hope so too. Neil Rockind, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us here on Sidebar. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Sidebar is produced by Sam Goldberg and Sean Bauer, YouTube manager Robert Zoki, and Alyssa Fisher as booking producer. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.